Hey folks, how's it going? It's Tim with another flashlight review. Today we'll be covering ThruNite's latest release. This is the ThruNite Lynx featuring an XM-L2 emitter. It's pretty much an evolution of their Scorpion model. So jumping into the packaging accessories, it did come in this nice presentation case, and within it, the accessories were a holster. Now this one's actually pretty nice because it does include both a Velcro quick release as well as a more of a what I like to call the perma loop. This offers a more confident hold within your belt. There's also a battery sleeve for use with two CR123 size batteries. This light cannot accept 2 lithium-ion cells, so no go there. And it did come with a lanyard, 3 spiral rings, nice little diffuser that goes in place of the crenulated bezel, a warranty card, as well as a pretty thorough instruction manual. So covering off on some of the highlights of the specs, it has max beam distance of 310 meters, max output of 1000 lumens. It's water resistance rated to IPX8, although no depth specified. It has a runtime max of 1200 hours, I presume on its Firefly mode, and then it has an impact resistance of 1.5 meters. So jumping into the design and features of the light, as previously mentioned, this is an evolution of their Scorpion model, but since I haven't reviewed that model, I can't really point out any of the highlights or changes since then. However, though, Self-Build did review a pre-production version of this. This is the finalized shipping version, so please read and check out his review in case you want to point out any differences between that and this light. So right off the top, you have a crenulated bezel that is removable, so you could access the lens as well as the reflector within, and also to swap it out with the diffuser. So with the stainless steel bezel removed, I did want to highlight one point. That stainless steel bezel does contribute to a ring that shows up around the outermost peripheral of the beam. I'll cover that in detail in the beam angle section, but as you can see here, since this whole head is removable, it's this entire head that actually traps the O-ring and the lens and everything else. So you could actually use this light without the stainless steel bezel installed, in which case it would actually widen the beam out to about 70 degrees versus 62, 64 without it. And here it is with the diffuser installed. The lens is double-sided AR coated, and this particular version does feature an XM-L2 emitter. And here's a close-up. Surrounding the head of the light is some rhombic texturing, although it's fairly smooth, doesn't really contribute too much in the way of the grip, and that stands the same for the body as well. There are 3 flat sides. One features ThruNite as well as their company motto guiding you through the night, the model number as well as the serial number, and then last but not least, it says limited edition Cree XM-L2U2. I don't really know that this truly is limited edition, but I'll find out. This head can be removed. So here you can see the XM-L2U2 emitter that's surrounded by a plastic centering disc, and I assume the entire LED is mounted to a brass pill. The throat of the light features these 4 flared heat fins that should aid with heat dissipation pretty well. I think I hit a max of about 113 degrees Fahrenheit in my runtime testing. These grooves, however, are purely for aesthetic purposes and do not aid with anti-roll. If anything, it's this tail cap thread here that actually helps with the anti-roll. The clip features a nice onyx finish that subjectively I think I find it pretty pleasing. It's not your typical, stainless steel style. And it is fairly firm, so just wondering if one has enough room to slip it here. I'll test that later, but getting back to the texturing as previously mentioned, while this is nicely finished, however though, it's fairly smooth and doesn't really offer much in the way of grip. I'll cover that in the size and handling section, but moving right along, towards the tail end is this rather imposing tail cap, and this is pretty much the trademark of this series of lights, formerly in the Scorpion and now in the Lynx. The tail cap switch, while physically activated, it's not an electronic switch, but it functions similarly to a piston drive. Although again, that would kind of be a misnomer because it's more about the feeling that makes it feel like a piston drive. It doesn't actually push anything. Everything mechanical about this tail switch is isolated right here. It's not pushing anything within the tube. Whereas Sunwayman's T20C actually did function like more of a true piston drive where it actually did push down on a tube within the main battery tube. I'll cover this in detail in a bit. But for now though, as you can see, they actually made a point to say, hey, read the manual before operating. But once you do, it should be fairly straightforward though. So digging into the tail cap, it's rather unique. I've never seen this implementation before. I think the closest I've seen was one of Light & Semon's M1A or M1B series. However, though, still, this is in a class of its own. While these threads are square cut, I did encounter some grittiness, but I don't think it's as a result of the thread. If anything, it's really more of the implementation within the light itself. So peering down into the tube, you see what looks to be yet another plastic sleeve. Now that is not the CR123 plastic sleeve, but rather something that's built into the light. And you do see what looks to be a whole bunch of grease applied in there. And the reason for that is because the O-ring on the tail cap side is actually implemented within the tail cap there. Now this tail cap, as previously mentioned, is quite substantial. If I remember correctly, I measured this to be somewhere around 83.2 grams, whereas by contrast, the body weighs 125.1 grams, so it's a little over 3/4 of the weight of the body. It does feel like a very solid piece, and here was the aforementioned piston feeling I mentioned about. So as you can see, it's just a spring, a metal touching, I assume, another metal piece within there. I haven't quite figured out how to disassemble this thing, but if I do, I'll cover that in the future. However, for now, again, as mentioned, this is not a clicky switch. It merely depresses in one of 4 positions. The leftmost position, counterclockwise, is a fixed state momentary full blast mode. And then the other 3 detents that you can't hear right now because this is off the light, it's just free spinning. But once you mount it onto the light, you can feel that there are 3 distinct detents to denote the 4 separate positions. So again, this is the leftmost counterclockwise, full blast momentary, and then the first of the 3 programmable modes, second, and third. I'll cover the UI in full details in that section later on. The tactical grip ring, in addition to allowing one to use in cigar mode, does have an attachment point for the lanyard. However, it is a miniature hole like with their TN11, now 11S, and you will need a mini ring in order to attach the lanyard to it. A key selling point for this light is the tactical aspirations, in the sense that this pretty much can operate in a fixed mode without any worries of changing modes. So again, you have 1 master on-off, which is momentary, and then 3 programmable modes. Now this tail cap switch, while this is easily enough to change with 2 fingers, is rather difficult to change with just 1 finger. I suppose if you had tacky gloves on, you probably could change it. However though, the main point is that it will pretty much stay in the fixed mode that you've adjusted it to during use, and shouldn't change during use. However though, one thing is that this button itself, given that it is not a mechanical clicky, it is doesn't require too much force to depress. So I figure in the holster, if not locked out, it is very easy to accidentally activate this light, and there is no electronic lockout. So I wish that there was a electronic lockout capability on this light. Case in point, I do have the light holster now, and this does not require a full press in order to activate the light. You could probably go about halfway to 3/4 of the way before activating it, and with this flap on, it is, I feel, in my opinion, fairly easy. Like, if you're bending over or whatnot, you may accidentally depress that, and you wouldn't even know that the light is on because this case is rather thick. And case in point, I'll go ahead and turn the light on now. There is no light leakage whatsoever. It's until you look down in there that you could actually see that the light is on right now. So this is something definitely to keep in mind, in that if you have this light holstered, it's probably best to lock it out with a quick twist, so that way you won't accidentally activate the light. Size and handling wise, it does rank as the longest in my current collections of single cell 18650 size lights, mostly attributable to the bulge from the tail cap. These are lined up in lengthwise. However though, since it doesn't have that turbo head installed, which I believe there's going to be an optional one later, since the Scorpion had one, I think it's only rational that this will come out with one, but I'm not 100% certain about that, so I'll update that in my comments later. However, its overall diameter size of the bezel is not that big. I did this 3/4 angle view so you can kind of see the relevant size. So the P25 and TN11S actually have the same turbo head size diameter, whereas the G10 is more along the lines of the Lynx. And then you have the very compact Olight M18 Maverick, and here is a standard 18650 size battery. This is a Ready Last 3400, So by comparison, definitely one of the longest lights in the single cell 18650 categories. Overall, with the tactical ring, it does provide a confidence-inspiring grip, even though the ceramic texturing, it's not the worst, but it does provide a bit of a grip. I would say that the body is actually a little bit more aggressive than the head. The head here actually is a bit smoother than the body itself. But again, with this tactical ring, that kind of is the key point when nestled between your fingers like that and with your thumb on the tail cap switch, that gives you the best grip. Now in a underhand grip, likewise the flare of the head here with your fingers trapped between this groove here of the body, still provides a reasonably good grip. While the mode selector does rotate very smoothly, it's got enough resistance such that I don't feel you could easily flick it with one finger. It does require the use of both of your fingers. So in overhand mode, while aimed like this, you could easily just do that to select the mode and activate the light, switch it over to the next level, press it on, or even like that, something like this, flick on or with your thumb. The ring also does allow one to use it in a cigar grip, nice and easy. Now with gloves on, these are just standard winter gloves, nothing form-fitting. It's a little bit bulkier because I want to see how this light feels like in operation. Given this tail cap switch is nice and big, it's very easily activated, no problems there whatsoever. However, mode selection, it depends on the type of your glove. I guess if it's leather, it's got a little bit more tack to it, so you have more grip. Because this is fairly smooth despite those little grooves there. It can be a little bit slippery with smooth cloth style gloves. But again, I imagine probably with leather or suede gloves, it should be a lot easier to operate. But overall, no issues with underhand or overhand grip. I've now reviewed a bunch of ThruNite's lights, and I gotta say, their quality continues to impress me. I know there's one particular jaded member in my audience that thinks that I give favorable reviews just because they give me free flashlights. Well, that's not the case, to be honest with you. It does take quite a lot of time to put a review together, so I've actually been reducing acceptance of reviews, as evidenced by my volume. I really just have not been reviewing as much as before. Between family, church, and other stuff, there just simply isn't enough time in a day. However, though, every once in a while there are lights that are sent my way that I'm particularly fond of, that yeah, okay, I will review them. And plus, not to mention, I am a human being after all. If I do like something, at least I will disclose that in my review. It's not like, say again, what you think if it's like, oh, okay, I'm getting free products, so thus I'm giving a favorable review. One of the conditions that I actually have with all of my suppliers is that I have full rights to say whatever I want in my reviews, unrestricted. If they have a problem with that, then do not send me the lights. And I've actually had a few vendors and dealers reject this condition, so that's why I don't bother reviewing their products. So getting back into the fit and finish of the product, the anodization again is quite good. It's definitely improved since the very first TN10 and TN11. I did see a jump in improvement with the TN11S, and then now that trend continues with the Lynx. I do notice that perhaps the fins around this area is just a shade off versus the head. I don't know if you can pick that up on the video camera, but at least I can see that under the fluorescent light with my naked eyes. And perhaps again here where the tail cap ring meets the mode selector, it's just a shade off, as you could probably see there. In terms of the application of the anodization to the rest of the body, within here between the crevices I perhaps spot just that one dot there that's missing, and perhaps just a very light amount there that's missing. So I don't know if it's a handling condition after it's been anodized or it's actually part of the anodization process, but again, it's something I will highlight to ThruNite. But overall, it is applied decently, but it's just one notch shy of what I would give a top-notch grade for. The stainless steel bezel does suffer from a little bit of sharp edges and corners here that I could feel. It's almost like as if it wasn't fully sanded down or deburred. That's something I'll highlight to ThruNite. But on the plus side though, it does thread on flush without any gap here whatsoever. The diffuser goes on perfectly flush without any gap whatsoever. All of the threads are machined very precisely. Case in point, this goes on very smoothly without any grease here. Same thing goes for the head. which does feature square cut threads. As I had highlighted earlier in the designs and feature sections, the only one that doesn't feel quite as smooth is the tail cap. And again, I don't feel it's because of the threads, since these threads are square cut and did come amply greased. It's more to do with what I feel is the arrangement there, which I had previously covered. This tail cap is probably like the most robust piece out of the entire light. As mentioned, it is a substantial piece and does weigh 3/4 of the light itself. This button feels very precise and it does not catch. Even though that's metal to metal grinding, I assume that it's likely due to anodization being applied both outside as well as inside within. The laser engraving are all very nice and sharp with no blotchiness whatsoever. And last but not least, the model name and serial number, as well as the one applied on the tail cap. And even the clip itself. However though, speaking of that clip, I'm uncertain as to how this onyx finishing will hold up in the long run, because in general, it's just not a particularly good choice in terms of durability. It looks nice enough, and of course that's subjective, but the wear factor I feel, however, is not there, only because it's based on past experience with other products coated in this finish. Now, if there was one nitpick about this light that I could highlight, aside from the sharpness around the bezel and perhaps very tiny amounts of anodization missing, is that very tiny minute gap right there. So this is after I already have the tail cap fully threaded, but even then it doesn't meet precisely. So that's actually a deviation considering how precise all the other parts are manufactured. But bottom line, this feels like an extremely solid light, and I have no doubt it should stand up to some fair amount of use and abuse. So of course, that remains to be seen in the long run, since I've just gotten this light for about over a week now. So given we've had a cold spell here recently, I figure it's a good time to test out how the ThruNite Lynx handles cold weather, because this is a metal tail cap. Okay, I put this out earlier, so it is frozen into the snow right now. Because as you know, in the cold, metal contracts, and just want to make sure that you can depend on this light. So right now I've left this out for a few hours, and let me get my headlamp on. That's a tray of water that I've been getting ready to freeze right now. So as you can see, I do have a laser thermometer, and that is registering about 17 degrees. Well, sorry, it is a bit cold here, so I am shaking. It is about 14 degrees there, so roughly it is cold. Obviously I can't outdo you guys living in Russia or somewhere further up north, but this is pretty cold for New York area, New Jersey area. So I'm gonna get that tail cap open. They did send along a battery for testing as well, so as you can see, this wasn't warmed in the house and just brought out. This has been sitting out here in the cold for a while now. So I get that in here. My Casio is registering I think 20 degrees, so yeah, I figured that's about the air temperature, although the Fluke with its thermal probe is measuring about 25.8 degrees there, as you can see. But suffice to say, it's pretty cold, and this switch still operates fine. Still nice detents, and does come on Firefly mode. Well, first let's go the momentary full blast. Okay, Firefly mode. Let me just cut out my headlamp. A memorized output. Next level. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to leave this on and just let it freeze and do a time lapse on it. forgot to set it to the higher level. There we go. Boy, it is cold. Alright, and we're just gonna give it a time lapse to see how it reacts once frozen up. The time now is 11:42, so I'll be back in about half an hour to check on this thing. Alright, so it's now 12:10. I've switched over to a different camera because the RX100's lens has frozen over. So I'm going to go upstairs, come back and check on this in a bit. It's now about half an hour later. It's time to call it a night. I'm actually going to poke a hole in the ice there so I could freeze this temperature probe underneath there, so that tomorrow I could check on the temperature of that block of ice, because even though, yeah, we know ice freezes at 32, but we'll see what the temperature actually is tomorrow morning, because right now it's about, like I said, 20 degrees Fahrenheit ambient. So it's now a few hours later and this thing has now frozen over, but I guess due to perhaps some of the heat generated from the light, it's prevented the light itself from being frozen over. So it's kind of interesting how it's like shifting around in there a little bit, and you can see the bubbles trapped in there, but the top is frozen solid rather. Light's still ticking. The interesting thing is that the fluke itself came from indoors, even though the wire is frozen and embedded in there. So that's why it's registering wrong. I always thought that it would take the reading directly from the temperature probe, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So that water is certainly not 56 degrees. I'll check back on this in a bit. So now it's another few hours later. I figure it's about time to end this experiment. The light is now pretty much completely frozen. It's not, well, it's still a little shifting, but it is rather frozen in there. Yep, so as you can see, there's definitely some bubbles trapped underneath that ice. But it's still running. I guess if there's one concern that I would test later is whether or not water gets trapped in between that switch, the gaps around there. And if that freezes up, it may cause the switch to be hard to use. So I'll get that checked out later. And now that the fluke has been out here long enough, it's finally, I guess, reporting the correct temperatures down to about 29 degrees. My Casio just came out from inside, so this is still registering 56 degrees here, so, but the fluke is hopefully accurate right now. So I did manage to get it freed now from its ice tomb. So here we go, quite a few hours later. So if there was one concern with this switch, it's the fact that water can get trapped between the crevices around this switch, and that may potentially freeze up if you do keep it outdoors. But hopefully, you know, you'll have this in a holster and that problem should be minimized. And peering into the reflector there, you can see there has been no water ingress, so of course this is not a comprehensive test since it wasn't submerged in all that deep water, but at least does show that there was no water ingress as a result of the parts contracting due to the cold. On the plus side of things, I also like the way that the battery performed. This is a new battery that ThruNite sent me for testing as well. It's 2600 milliamps. I don't know what is their underlying cell. Of course, the cell has been indoors now for a short while, but as you can see, it's not quite room temperature yet. But it held up through the testing because, as you know, when it gets cold, the overall capacity is reduced. And while I did have the light set to a lower setting. I'm not exactly sure what the current draw was, but again, just like the fact that the battery did hold up as well without tripping. The UI of the light is very straightforward in that there are 4 positions on this selector dial that you can pick. The first one is a momentary on, and it is not programmable. So it is always in a momentary mode. And then the other 3 positions are programmable. So I currently have this programmed in Firefly. And I'm guessing probably what I like to call my medium. And then finally, max output. All of these modes are memorized once you have them programmed, which I'll get into in a second. But this allows you the flexibility of programming the light from low to high or from high to low based upon your preferences. You can also program a fast strobe as well as a slow strobe. Both are fixed rates. So now I'm going to demonstrate how you program the light using the ramp and memorization on my PVCM LED, so that way you can actually see the lumens figures fluctuate up and down. 2 changes that I have made for my PVCM LED is that I now use these paper templates because I figure larger diameter lights would benefit from their bezels reflecting more of that light back in. So this would help the smaller bezel lights and not give advantage and make it a little bit more accurate. Another thing I did was that I still calibrate with the XENO G10v2, but instead of at 460 lumens, I've now downgraded that down to 410 lumens because I figure with the wear and tear over time on that light, plus also some of the more recent measurements I've taken with the lights that were sent to me for testing, I felt that it was way more accurate. So plus I always like to keep the manufacturers honest by revising my testing method. Let's get this on here. The first mode, the most counterclockwise, is a momentary mode. So when you depress it, it always come on in full blast. And this position is not programmable. So as you can see, this level is not regulated, so it will start dropping the moment it comes on. Right. The next 3 modes clockwise of that are programmable, of which this first one, I have it in Firefly mode. Now to program it to something else, I'm going to first turn it on to show you. This won't register because, as mentioned, I programmed the XENO G10v2 on the 4K range of the light meter, and in order to be able to register this, I will have to calibrate in the 400 range with a different light. So anyway, this demonstrates that this is in Firefly mode. With the light off, you depress and hold until you start seeing it ramping. It'll take approximately 9 seconds to go from minimum to max, after which there will be 2 flashes to indicate that it's reached that, and then enter a slow strobe and then a fast strobe. So let's just say you wanted the fast strobe memorized, you just simply let go of the button, and that mode is memorized now. So let's go back to momentary. The next one over is now memorized in strobe. It'll always ramp in the opposite direction of which way you last ramped. So because this was in strobe, it'll just simply go back down to Firefly mode again and just start ramping upwards again. But if I stop here and memorize it, shut off the light, and then ramp again, it'll start ramping downwards. And speaking of which, I'm going to lift this up and let you see, because once it hits Firefly, it will blink twice. It's just you won't be able to see it here. So at either end, it will flash twice to let you know you've reached either ends of the extreme, and then you could program it somewhere in between. Now the next one, I had it memorized, I believe, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 lumens. And then finally, the last one, I had it memorized on max. So this is pretty neat in the sense that you could program it from low to high or high to low, with the exception that your momentary will always be the one that's in the first position, the one that's most counterclockwise, and that was always momentary on high. Alright, so I've got my rig set up again for taking beam distance, and I'm starting off with the XENO G10v2 again because this is a perfectly regulated light. And I'm checking to make sure I'm in that 233, 234, basically 230 to 237 range, which I am now that the light has stabilized. I do have a D600 on the floor to take the light meter reading, since you can't see it from this distance on the main Sony RX100. And also the exposure is fixed at 1/50th of a second, aperture at f1.8, and the ISO at 400. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the ThruNite Lynx first. So the ThruNite Lux has a claimed beam distance range of 310 meters with 24K candela, and that should be about a 960 lux reading at 5 meters. So I'm going to give this 30 seconds. I'm actually at 23 seconds right now, so I'm very close. But lux reading does fall short. I'm in the 770 range. So the light is not regulated. It will start dropping immediately upon turn on, which is why the timing is critical. I'm actually around the 760 range, so I figure I'll give it about 765 because that's what it was around at the 30-second range. So next up we have ThruNite's TN11S. This is supposed to have a 29K candela reading, 355 beam distance. I'm now at 30, just over 30 seconds, and falling around the 600 range actually. 638 around. Again, this too is not a regulated light, so it will start dropping immediately upon turn on. But see, I'm not doing a peak reading either. I'm just taking pretty much what I'm seeing, whereas manufacturers are probably going by a peak reading. So this is about 630-ish, close to 640, mid 630s. And again, I'll calculate the beam distance through the captions later. And last but not least, we have NITECORE's P25. This one has a XM-L2 emitter, which the TN11S also has, but the Link has the new XM-L2 U2 bin emitter. I'm now hitting upon the 30-second range, so it's about 690 right there. Perhaps a little higher right there, 695. I'm expecting 800 lux to hit that 20K CD, so not that close, but not that far either. Again, I'll calculate the beam distance via captions later. So the caveat here is that, again, my readings tend to be a little on the low side. I do plan on getting a NIST calibrated light meter in the near future, so hopefully maybe then I'll retake these readings. But for now, at least this will give you an idea of how it compares to each other. Despite lacking a turbo head, the overall beam profile is definitely one of a thrower. So here it is on full blast. Now that ring that you see on the furthest most peripheral here is because of the stainless steel bezel. Once you remove it, it'll disappear. Case in point, so I do have that bezel removed right now, and as you can see, that outer ring has disappeared. Given that you can program this light from min to max, doesn't really make sense for me to go through that other than to show you the difference between max output and then firefly mode. Now this firefly mode is actually even lower than that of the P25s, which I'll light up. First, let me just get both onto max. So overall, the P25 has definitely a more purplish cast to it, whereas the ThruNite Lynx has more of a greenish, more neutral white. Here I've stepped down the exposure a little bit, the shutter, so that way you could kind of see the differences between the two. Now again, that ThruNite beam is not that bluish as what I'm seeing in real life. It really is more of a very neutral white. I should be careful with that. Neutral usually implies a little bit warm cast, but to me, this is very more like an eggshell white there. So this is on sunny white balance, so that's why it may not be perfect. Whereas the P25 on my left hand here, it's not that purple, but overall it does have more of a purplish beam than, say, the ThruNite Lynx. Now I do want to get this into firefly mode. So here you can see that the P25, even though it does have a pretty low mode, the ThruNite Lynx can go ultra low. And this would make a great nightstand light because of the fact that it is a true firefly and shouldn't be too bad for night adapted eyes. Not captured due to the exposure value is the flood. However, though, there is still some flood to go with that pinpoint beam there. Likewise for the P25, you only see the hotspot here because of the exposure, but there is a flood profile as well. But overall, the P25 definitely has a higher low, whereas the Lynx truly is a genuine firefly mode. Now here are the differences in beam profile with the diffuser off and with the diffuser on. So currently this is no diffuser. Unfortunately, it's a bit overexposed because I need to be able to show you the firefly mode as well. So this is on max. And then let me flick it over to firefly. And then now with the diffuser installed. First on max. And as you can see, that just flat out makes a very nice wall of light. The center hotspot, there is still one, but like I said, it's very nicely diffused. And my entire desk, although you can't see it, is just nicely lit up. And here it is on firefly mode. So that you almost cannot see, although it is visible with the eye. But again, I kept the exposure value locked so that way you could see the differences. I'm just going to bring it up close so you could see that shining against my hand. And here it is in firefly mode, pointing into the lens. The overall beam angle is roughly 64 degrees, and I'm not sure if you could pick that up, but there's this flare here that ends up showing up as a bright ring around the outermost peripheral profile of the light. However, though, that is caused by the stainless steel bezel if you remove it, in which case on this light you could actually use it without the stainless steel bezel installed. That ring would go away. Case in point, I now have the stainless steel bezel removed, and compared to the beam angle before, it's actually widened up a little to 70 degrees now. And of course you don't see those flares any longer either. And given that it does have a smooth reflector, although not with the turbo head installed, still the overall hotspot is pretty tight at roughly, I would say, about 20 degrees or so. As part of my initial conclusions, I feel like the Lynx is a very cool light. I like the fact that this switch, which is rather unique, I've never experienced one like this before, allows one to program it to exactly their preferences. And with tactical aspirations in mind, I figured that the first position momentary on does make sense. My only concern with this switch remains that it's fairly easy to activate accidentally because it doesn't require full press, and there is no physical click that one may hear and pick up on in order to even get a hint that the light is on or has been activated. An electronic lockout would be the top of my wish list for the next iteration of this light, because having to physically lock out the light and then require two hands to twist it back on totally renders the tactical aspect use of this light meaningless, especially for emergency response use. The programming is fairly easily done, like the fact that you just simply push in and let it start ramping up, although I did wish that there was a blink at 50% as well, so that way you kind of know your midpoint. But with enough practice, you could kind of pretty much guess where that is. Or if, of course, if you had access to a light meter, especially even one with an iPhone, your iPhone, you could download a lot of free lux meter type of apps, so that could at least get you pretty much in the ballpark of programming it in the range that you would want. Now, in consideration of tactical use, I do like the fact that you have one fixed momentary on mode, so you could have full blast in case you need that immediately, and you have 3 programmable modes, of which one of them can be a firefly mode, as well as either a fast or slow strobe. So you could go from high to low or low to high as you rotate the ring counterclockwise. It's all up to you, and you have a bit of flexibility in programming that. That firefly mode is fantastic, especially with use with a diffuser, as at nighttime it offers very nice broad beam, especially for night adapted eyes that doesn't destroy your vision. I love the fact that on max output you could get up to 1000 lumens. I haven't tested this with 2 primaries yet, so I don't know if that actually bumps up the output, but I'll do so in the future and put that into the comments or into my written review. However, though, for now, it's kind of like, you could go from a firefly to max of 1000 lumens, you have access to strobe and whatnot. It's got a very solid build, and I believe in the future there may be an option for a turbo head. You could slap on a diffuser. That's all included as part of the standard light. It would have been nice if this clip was removable because, again, in consideration of the way that one holds the light, you would always pretty much have to position this in that groove there so it doesn't interfere with your fingers or whatnot and your grip otherwise. The switch does feel extremely robust, and I have no questions about that holding up in the long run. The only thing again is that water may potentially get trapped in there, and during cold weather use, if you're outdoors and you have it directly exposed to the elements, that's just something to be a little bit mindful about. But hopefully, holstered with the holster covering this, it won't be too big a deal. The main thing, as I had mentioned earlier, was the fact that there is no electronic lockout. I would have really liked that instead of physical lockout, because I kind of feel that defeats the whole purpose of a light with tactical aspirations. I think it would actually be pretty neat if they had a single CR123 version of this light, of course, not to that output. So very cool, ThruNite. How about a single CR123 size version to accompany this? As part of FTC disclosures, the ThruNite Lynx as well as the ThruNite 2600 mAh batteries were provided by ThruNite for review. Thanks again for watching.